Welcome back to another episode of Net Chasers. Today's episode I'm really excited for because one, Patty has been a coach, but she also now wears an administrator hat. So Patty, thanks for coming on. We appreciate the time that you're investing into this conversation. I'd like to open it up with the same question that we ask all our guests. What is a 30-second path to where you are currently today? But then, if you can, answer what is the state of college athletics?
Yes, thank you again for having me. And I'm excited about your new journey, and this project Net Chaser. So I'm excited to
Thank
be
you.
here and be one of the first guests on your podcast. So my name is Patty Medina. I am currently the Associate Athletic Director for Student Athlete Development and Inclusive Excellence at American University. As Brian mentioned, I have 17 years of coaching experience. Yeah, the grassroots way started middle school, went to JV, high school, junior college. Similar to Brian, we actually met when I was coaching at the JUCO NAIA level. And then about 5 years ago, I transitioned into athletic administration. And so that trajectory looks like I was my first stop was at a private school. I was a gym teacher and assistant athletic director. And then I was at the junior college level again, but this time as an associate athletic director. And this November will be 2 years here at American University for associate athletic director. And
So,
then the question, as you
yeah, go ahead.
mentioned, yeah, it's been actually interesting because when I was at the junior college level, we were starting to feel the effects of NIL, the effects of collectives, the effects of transfer portal at the junior college level, right? And
Interesting.
then now that I get to the Division 1 mid-major level, we feel it here as well, but it's not as impactful or as detrimental, I guess you could say, as it is at the Power 4, Power 5 level. And so it's been an interesting space for me, especially because, as I mentioned, my position is student athlete development. And so I have friends that work at Power 4, Power 5 schools, and they share with me that a lot of those students don't really care about career progression, don't really care about resume building. They're worried about how much money you can get me, right? Whereas here at American University, a lot of our student athletes are still very much, I like to call them the wholesome athlete, because they still come to AU because of our academic accolades. They still come here because they know that if they want to work on the hill, they can get internships here. If they want to work with monumental sports and create a career in sports or in law or whatever, they still come to AU for those reasons. And I know that for other institutions, they just kind of bounce around. And so we've had the pleasure here at the mid-major level that we have students that stay, 3, 4, 5 years even, because to them it's about the fit. It's about what our institution can give them after they graduate, and then, setting them up for success.
Well, and I think that that's a great segue into this post house settlement
Mhm.
decision. How's American handling that? What are some of the maybe the resources or these initiatives that may have popped up, in the last few months or maybe in preparation the last year? But what is the focus now with American athletics as it relates to the house settlement, but also providing this opportunity for student athletes?
Yeah, so we didn't feel the aftermath of it as much as most institutions. Obviously, like most institutions, we are functioning at a deficit right now as far as budget. So we did have a lot of changes within administration, within employment situations here on our campus. But luckily for us, aren't fully we didn't opt in completely. And so we do have a collective that mainly works with men's basketball and men's wrestling. And so there are high revenue sports. And then we also have different NIL programming that we do. And so with my student athlete development position, we do a lot of workshops on branding, NIL, tax, how to report NIL things on your taxes. We do a lot through Teamworks, NIL Go. There's a lot of things that we do that technically we don't have to, but for us, it's like, how can we get ahead of the curve and really make sure that our student athletes are knowledgeable, at least knowledgeable of what they have. And, NIL's been around for a long time. It's called NIL now, but it's been branding for years, right? Student athletes used to do branding for different companies, and now they're able to get even more money and things in return. Whereas in the past, it was just like, oh, hey, you get free gear, or, just tag us on this Instagram. And so now they can actually get a lot of compensation. And so we do have student athletes that are making some good money here on our campus. But again, it's something that we don't necessarily oversee, or that we say, hey, there's this company that wants to do that. A lot of times the student athlete is the one that pursues those companies.
So maybe educate us on just your day to day. Like what does it look like? But at the same time, like what are the conversations that you're having, not only with your other administrators, but maybe the coaches on, moving the needle for their programs, obviously revenue generation, but at the same time, maybe that outreach and branding piece.
Yeah, so that's actually a great question, because I have had the opportunity in the last 3 months. As I mentioned, we had some changes here on our staff. And so I now have an expanded role, and I do a lot of our fan engagement and our marketing. And so now I'm in my marketing and branding bag, and I've been learning a lot about revenue generation, which is something that, I set out to do this year. I said, okay, I know this and that about athletic administration. And I've said this before, in the next 5 years, I would like to be an athletic administrator, an athletic director at a mid-major, small D1 college. But the goal is to be an athletic director. And so for me, I'm not oblivious to the fact that to become an athletic director, you have to have revenue generation, right? And as coaches, if you think about it, for 17 years, what do we do? Fundraise and generate revenue. So I've had the experience, but I don't have an actual portfolio to show it. And so now I've kind of said, okay, how can I get into this space, in these conversations, in these rooms? And so when we had the changes within our administration, marketing was something that came up, and marketing is something that I've done for the last 20, 30 years. And so now I've been able to be in the conversations about our multimedia rights company. And so, which for me was new, but now that I'm realizing, like, it's great, but then you also try to figure out. So for example, Desiree Reed Francois at University of Arizona, like, she did multimedia rights internally. So they brought it in-house, whereas like a lot of people are going to a third party. And so learning those things, and here we're going to an external party, but then seeing it and seeing the work that I'm putting in and saying, okay, well, this is definitely feasible to do in-house, right? But you have to have the right people. And so just making mental notes for but when I become an AD, those are things that I'm like, okay, now I know what it looks like going to a third party. I know what it looks like going in-house. I've been able to pick the brains of people that have done both, and then kind of looking at it that way. And so for my day-to-day, I oversee our game day operations for our high revenue sports. So that's volleyball, men's and women's basketball, and wrestling. And so with that, the conversations that I have with coaches, it's like, hey, revenue generation is in everybody's job. It's in everybody's responsibility. It's in not just like, oh, just marketing or just development. It's everybody's job, right? Because at the end of the day, like, the more money we bring in, the easier everything becomes for everybody. And so we'll sit and have marketing meetings with coaches, and we'll say, what are some things that you want to do, right? And so in the last 3 months, I've put in like a dance cam, and as you know, I attend a lot of WNBA games. And so I go to these games, and the Nets and the Caps and, Commanders. And I go to all these games really more so like a social experiment, because I want to see what they're doing and then what I can implement in my current institution. And so we've implemented like a dance cam, a smile cam. The Valkyries just did like a cumbia cam. So I'm like, oh my God, that would be awesome for Hispanic Heritage Month. So just doing all these things so that if and when the multimedia rights company comes in, we can say, hey, we have a dance cam that's already established. Find us a sponsor for the dance cam. Hey, we have already Smile Camp. Can you find us a dental office for this one, right? And so then I kind of get to do the guinea pig of the project. And then when the multimedia rights company comes in, then we can we can do that. I can pitch what I'm doing to them, and then they can find the sponsors, hopefully.
So I love that, the fact that you're bringing in what your experiences are, which is just going to professional games and then
Yeah.
bringing it to the table. So talk a little bit about, and you got the administrator hat on. What does it take in today's landscape to be an administrator? How many things are you juggling, but at the same time, you know, be like bringing in that newness, the freshness, and all the things that a student athlete can then have for themselves in their toolbox. But also, how are you equipping, and this is a loaded question a little bit, but how are you equipping the coaches to be able to kind of be the bridge between administration and all the things that you're doing and seeing and bringing to the table, and then the deliverable for the student athletes?
Yeah, no, and great question. And I think the first part of it is, when I was at the junior college level, I have a mentor that was saying, okay, whatever you do, treat it as your next job, right? Yes, feet on the ground, bloom where you're planted, but really treat your current job as your next job, right? So when I was at the JUCO level, I treated my JUCO like a D1. We had halftime shows, we had all these things. Like, we had probably the most programming you could think of any JUCO for game days, right? And for me, it was like, okay, we want to give our student athletes the D1 experience. So now that I'm at the D1 experience, and Megan kind of alluded to it in the previous podcast, is like, we're technically in pro sports right now. We're technically in a pro sports space. So for me, it's like, okay, now that I'm at the D1 level, when I was at the JUCO, I treated it like a D1. Now that I'm at the D1 level, I treat it like a pro sport. And so when I talk to coaches and when I ask for buy-in, one, I'm blessed to be one of the few, and actually probably the only administrator in our office that has coaching background. And that's something that for me is really a leg up when it comes to talking to coaches, because I'll give them the perspective of like, hey, help me help you, right? Consider me an extension of your coaching staff. How can I help? And so when I tell them that, they already know, like, okay, she has coached and she knows what I want to deal with and what I'm dealing with. And so even when they, on the inclusive excellence part of my job, right, when they have some team cohesion problems or there's some kind of tension within their team, I tell them to reach out to me and say, hey, we have, for example, we're a very political, politically inclined campus. And so sometimes those different views affect the teams. And so there's been teams where there's been, different conflicting views on the team, and just teaching them how to speak through differences. And so then I'll organize a workshop for the team on how to have dialogue through differences, or we'll do an empathy workshop, or we'll do a disc assessment with the leaders, or we'll do a Clifton Strengths test. And so the more I talk to coaches and I tell them, hey, you know what your team needs more than I do. But if you don't tell me, I don't know how to help you. And so a lot of times the coaches are like, hey, this is what we're dealing with. Can you help us? And or sometimes it's as simple as like, hey, we want to do community service for Thanksgiving. Like, can you find us some ideas, some things to do? And I'm like, all right, great. And so for me, it kind of, and I think back, and the jobs that I had as a coach, and I look back and I'm like, I want to be for them what I wish I would have had as a coach, as an official, as whatever it is, that role that I'm in. I want to be for them what I wish I would have had. And so when I have these conversations with our coaches, I tell them, like, consider me an extension of your staff. Now, whether they use me or not, that's up to them, right? Because I'm here and available, and there's coaches that really capitalize on it and that I really have great relationships with. And then there's others that I don't really talk to too much. And then I'm also a sport admin for women's soccer. And so that's one that gets a lot of my resources because I'm literally with them day in and day out.
So you brought up a great point of the perspective of a coach on an administration staff. So, and I think we've all known, our friends who have retired from coaching, got into administration, but I feel that's like sparse now. Like it's not really a thing. So what is the advantage of having a coach's perspective when, the mission, or not, I wouldn't even say mission, but maybe the responsibility for an administrator is to help coaches do their expertise and build teams and have that deliverable. But what is the conversations like as an administrator? Like, are there conversations saying, hey, we need to get a coach's perspective? Like, is that a thing anymore, or is this now career administration path?
I'm smiling because I have made it my job, not really my job. I have made it my like current purpose to recruit more former coaches to admin. And the
Good,
reason,
that's good.
yeah, like anytime I hear anybody like, oh, I don't know if I want to keep coaching, I'm like, come on, come to administration, come to the administrative side. And the
Yeah.
reason I say that, and I've said this on another podcast, and I really don't care if I get heat about it or not, but my problem is that there are people that have never coached a day in their lives making decisions for the coaches that they oversee. So you have, and I'll speak on my experience, right? You have an administrator saying, oh, yeah, coach, you can drive 8 hours, coach your game, eat, and then come back and drive. And you drive to and from. And it's like, as a coach, I know that, yes, is it doable? Yes. But the mental weight of doing something like that, right? Of like saying, hey, now you got to drive and game plan while you're driving, mentally game planning while you're driving, get there, mentally prepare for a game, win, right? Because that's the ultimate outcome. And then debrief and then drive back and decompress while you're driving, right? And so
Yeah.
to somebody that doesn't understand coaching, that would be like, oh, you're fine, you drive, coach, and come back. Like, that's not a problem. But for someone that has coached, you say, no, that's not fair to the coach for you to expect them to drive and then give their 110% effort to their players and then drive back and get them safely. And so I say that to say that I have sat in certain rooms where the frustration that comes with the lack of knowledge of what it takes to be a coach has really urged me to help anyone and anyone that wants to become an administrator. Like, I'm like, I'll help you. I'll teach you the shortcuts that I wish I would have known, because I was at the high school level, JUCO level, now Division 1. Like, you don't have to go that route. You can skip from college, coaching to straight to Division 1. And so that for me has been something that has been frustrating. And I think the more coaches start to infiltrate the administrative side, the more transparency there will be, right? Because a lot of times there's a lot of gatekeeping at this level where it's like, oh, let's not tell the coaches. And in my head, I'm like, me as a coach, I would want to know that.
Yeah.
Me as a coach, I would want to know that, not to just be in the weeds and in everybody's business, but to know what I can do on my end to make the situation better. Right. And so I've sat in conversations where I tell administrators, like, we need to share that with coaches. Oh, no, they're going to make a big deal about it. No, they might actually come up with some solutions that you haven't thought of because you're not on that side of the spectrum. Right. And so it's been interesting. So I say that, as you can tell, I'm a little passionate about this, but yeah, I think for me, and Brian Stanchak had a panel at his head coaches training center, and it was current athletic directors that were former coaches. And Heath at McNeese, Heath Schroyer, I can never say his last name, Heath Schroyer, I like admire him so much because, and I've heard him speak like 4 or 5 times, and every time I'm like, oh my God, this guy is so dope. And the reason he is because he literally has been at the level that the coaches he's serving are in. And he says it all the time. He's like, me being a former coach is my superpower because they respect me, because they know that I wouldn't put them in a situation that isn't beneficial to them because I've been in that position. Right. And so I think that's something for me as well that sets me apart from any administrators that I have 17 years of coaching experience at many levels. And now when I serve our coaches, I can give bad news and I can say, hey, no, we don't have the budget for that, but this is what we can do to hopefully get to that. Right. And so I think the more former coaches come to the administrative side, the better. So Brian, when you're ready, let me know.
Well, let's explore this idea first.
Yeah.
But so let me ask you this, because you supervise sports. So what are coaches needing most today?
That's a loaded question too, because it really depends, right? It's I think the number one thing that coaches are needing, and Jose Fernandez spoke on it recently on Twitter, and on the WBCA letter, is transparency. I think transparency is the thing that coaches want and need the most, because it will create a sense of culture, right? If you feel like your administration is holding things back from you, or not keeping it real, or giving you a lot of gray areas where they can just give you a black and white in certain spaces, I think it's really causing friction amongst certain administration and their culture, right? But in that same tonality, if you don't know, as an administrator, if you don't know, just say that. Like, that's part of transparency, that's part of authenticity. Is like, there's so many administrators that want to be right, that want to say like, yes, this is what we're doing. It's like, you don't know if tomorrow this whole NIL thing is going to be something different. You don't know what's going to happen between now and the next 24 hours when it comes to House, NCAA, Congress, even our political climate. Like, you don't know. And so sometimes the most powerful thing an administrator can do is saying, hey, Brian, I appreciate your concern, I understand your frustration, but quite frankly, I don't have an answer for you. And by me saying that, instead of making some BS up, that would make you respect me even more, because you're like, okay, my administrator is at least telling me that he or she doesn't know, and not just making something up and then later on having to backtrack and say, oh, well, I wasn't sure, so I said that. And so I think that's the number one thing. And I will echo what Jose said in his post, is that there has to be a level of transparency, especially when it comes to Title IX, especially when it comes to revenue share, especially when it comes to priorities in the department, right? Like, if a coach, I was at a conference with the Charles Whitcomb Institute, and we were at USF. And one of the questions they asked at USF, the administrators, it was like, how do you have everybody supporting everybody? And then, they say, well, we're honest. We say, hey, football's our highest revenue sport. That's our priority. And then somebody asks, well, why don't the other sports get mad? And they're like, no, because they understand that if football brings in all this revenue, they're going to get a trickle of it as well. So now it's all hands on deck for these sports. And so I think that's something that a lot of institutions need, and that a lot of coaches are yearning for, is that transparency. Like, I know I'm not the hot shot on campus. Just say that. Don't make me believe otherwise. Like, just be honest, and then I'll help. Because if, for example, here, men's basketball and wrestling are two high revenue sports, if all of our other sports are on board about bringing more fan engagement to these two sports, they're going to get a trickle effect from that as well. And so I think the number one thing that coaches are needing from the administration right now is transparency and authenticity, to really just be like, hey, we don't know what's going on, or we don't have the answers. And I think a lot of administrators would rather give an answer than to just say, hey, I don't know.
So do you think the angle of that letter was more about kind of the revenue share percentages, or like, is it more about the return of the investment of these
I mean,
sports
it's
earning
really
money?
knowing, right? It's kind of like the March Madness situation, right, where you didn't know what was happening on the men's side. And then you had social media coming up, and then the guys on March Madness on the men's side were like, yeah, we got these like buffet meals and this swag bag. And then you got Sedona Prince on the other side was like, oh, this is what we got, a little wrapped up sandwich, and it's just like that lack of transparency, where it could have been addressed earlier, instead of it having to be this big social media thing now, where it's like, oh, this is what's happening, right? And same with even salaries at the WNBA. Like, there's more transparency. So yes, you're going to have more people not happy because now the numbers are starting to come out more publicly than they were in the past. Whereas in the past, you went under the radar, nobody would know because there was no social media to really show. And so I think with Jose, it's more so like, hey, just be honest, like, because eventually the truth is going to come to the light, right? And so it's like, just be transparent about it. Just be transparent about it. What's being shared where? What's the percentages? Like, what do we need to do to make this better? How can we continue to advocate for women's sports? And so I think that for me was something that really, again, transparency is like the underlying word right now, because there's so many people that are that are already questioning a lot of what's going on. And so I think the more transparent associations and organizations can be, the better.
So I'm going to flip that question on you, but I'm going to kind of set it up in a way where, coaches, yes, we got to win games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the next level up is, okay, if you want to win games, you got to recruit the heck out of, recruits and close them. Got to have a staff who can, you know, generate development and be great for those kids. Panning up, you got to get your alumni engaged. You got to do some community service. You
Mm-hmm.
got to do some community outreach and convert fans into don't. So, it's like from X's and O's, you start panning up. So, what do administrators need from coaches? So, same question, it's just in reverse. So, now that you're an administrator, what are you calling on your coaches to do? Like, what's the top priority? What's maybe the one or two top priorities?
Yeah, great question, because I kind of alluded to it earlier. Like, we don't know what we don't know, right? And I'll use one of our teams for example. They have a coach on staff, kind of like a Dobo, and they're organizing like all these community service and all these things and trying to reach out to these organizations. And I don't hear about it until like later down the line. And I'm like, oh, I know somebody that works there. Like, I could have got you in, to do a community service. We could have figured this out a long time ago, and you wouldn't have had to go through all the trouble of like cold emailing people. And so I think the what I would recommend coaches to do is to make more administrators aware what's going on within their programs, right? If you're going to have, even with us here, like my compliance girl and she carried the Huff. So we always say, like, I wish more coaches would invite us to practice. Like, I know that I can go to a practice, but it feels weird when it's like you have an administrator walking into your practice and then we're just sitting there like, and the coaches are probably like, what are they doing in here? Like,
Right.
and so I wish more coaches would invite administrators to their practice. If I could give like one piece of advice, I would say, hey, send an email saying like, hey, this coming week we're going to have this specific practice time was going to be really, really good because we're going to do a scout scrimmage, whatever, right? And send that and really invite admin into your culture, because nowadays it's a space where it's you versus the players, right? Your word versus the players. And God forbid there's a situation where a player complains and then now your job is on the line. If you had invited your coach or your administration to your practices, they would have been able to see firsthand maybe that player has very bad, body language, like other things that you won't be able to see. And then now it's going your player's word versus yours. And in this current state, like, it's very difficult to go against a student athlete's word, and so I think for the sake of support, more coaches should invite administrators to their practices. And like I said, if I have a rapport with the coach, I'll show up to a practice. Like women's and men's basketball here, we'll show up. Field hockey, we'll just walk out there and, but then there's others that I'm like, I don't really want to walk in there because then they think I'm like taking notes or, doing this, and that. And so I think the more coaches could invite administrators into their space, the more support they're going to get. And sometimes coaches will say something at practice that'll be a buzzword for us. It's like, oh, wow, I can help him or her with that, right? And it'd be like, hey, coach, at practice, you said that, this, and that. I can help you with that. Actually, here, I have a connection with that, right? Or, hey, I know that Molly wants an internship with so-and-so. I can help with that, And so I think the more you can bring in administrators and make them like support instead of make them a supporter and like part of the program instead of just like, oh, that's admin. Even at the women's Final Four, you know, there's a NACTA hosts some conferences at the women's Final Four, and there was 3 coaches there. Me and Sheila at USF being 2 of the 3 coaches, you know, 3 former coaches. And I think the more we can get rid of the us versus them, you know, idea, the better. And so me being a former coach, I can advocate for the coaches in the administrator room. But then when I go to the coaches, I can say, hey, behind the scenes, we're fighting for y'all. We're out here fighting for y'all behind the scenes. You might not know it, but we're out here fighting for y'all. And sometimes the coaches just want to hear that, hey, we're supporting, we're fighting for them. We're doing, you know, what we can behind the scenes. But a lot of times the right hand doesn't talk to the left hand. Right. And so you have coaches thinking that it's
that
coaches
part.
admin. Yeah. And you have admin thinking it's admin versus coaches, right? But it's like, if you don't tell coaches that we're in the deficit and they have to fundraise, you know, they won't come with ideas. So I think the more we can cross communicate, the better. And I think it's going to only get worse if we don't, because there's going to be a lot of space for, you know, just ambiguity. There's so much ambiguity right now. And I think the more we can communicate, coaches with admin and vice versa, is going to be important.
Is there pressure for revenue generation? I mean, maybe as a administrative department, but also from your coaches? Like, is that a priority?
Yes. And we did something recently where we finally have like a fundraising rollover account. So prior to this new athletic director, anything they would fundraise, it was like use it or lose it. It wouldn't roll over. And so now, yeah. And so, which is interesting because at the NAI level, we had fundraising accounts all the time. Like you brought in a guarantee game, you know, 20% of it goes to athletics and the other 80% would go into your fundraising or whatnot. And so here, it was one of those things where it's like anything they fundraise, it went straight to the operating budget and it was use it or lose it. And if they didn't use it, then it would be used for other, you know, things that were in the red. Now that everyone has their own fundraising budget, it actually created a sense of pride, because it's like, oh, wow, I can fundraise past my goal and I'll have money going into next year, right? So then now you have teams going to Puerto Rico, and now you have teams doing all these things because they can fundraise now for upcoming years. Or they'll say, hey, we're going to get black uniforms next year because we didn't use all of our fundraising money. And so there is a sense of responsibility to bring in revenue. But I think another point is that the way administrators present it can make a big difference as to the buy-in that you get from the coaches, right? If you just say, hey, we need y'all to get us out of this $300,000 hole, coaches are going to be like, well, it wasn't my fault that we don't have enrollment, right? It's not my fault that we don't. But if we say, hey, if you fundraise this amount, if each team fundraises this amount, anything over that is going straight to you. Anything over that is going straight to fundraising, and it can roll over. And so now you have coaches that are like, oh, heck yeah, I want to do that. And the way I pitch it is like, you have to fundraise at any level that you go to. So a lot of our coaches here, you know, AU is a stepping stone for them. And so I tell them, like, okay, if you do want to go to a Power 4, Power 5, and you're upset because we're asking you to fundraise 30 grand, I was like, just wait till you go to a Power 5, and like Jose is asked to fundraise 300,000 just, you know, prior to even season starting. And so I think that's something that motivates them as well. It's like when you put it into perspective of like revenue generation for anyone, admin or coaches, is an asset that you can put on your resume, and the more you can do it, the better.
Yeah, I think that, you know, going back to the transparency, I think it's that piece, because that's what kills the trust between coaches and administrators is, you know, what can I do with the money that I'm generating? And I think most coaches are stewards of the department. You know, there's a percentage that can go back and things like that, but then what are you doing with the money? You know, and I think that's just constant dialogue. And I mean, it helps with building that trust, knowing if we are breaking up a guarantee game, that the money we're giving the department goes to the right places, not just paying someone else's bill.
Right.
I'm going to pivot a little bit. You've been known to bridge what we've been talking about, coach and administrator. But today is Hispanic Heritage Month, the kickoff. And so,
Yes.
what are the responsibilities that you have as a woman, a Latina, with just the representation, but also, just this lane that more Hispanic women can have.
Yeah. No, it's awesome because it's awesome that we're hosting this podcast literally today. I didn't think of it until this morning. I was like, oh man, I'm on the podcast and it's the first day
Yeah.
of Hispanic Heritage Month. But I recently listened to Jamie Boggs, who is the athletic director at Grand Canyon. And, she's one of 4 Asian women that are, or Asian in general, probably the only woman that are athletic directors. And in one of her interviews, like from 2023, they were asking her the same question, like, what's your responsibility? And she said something that resonated with me was, she said, I grew up being taught that you have to work hard, right? And that's something that it resonated with me because it's like growing up, I never thought, oh, I have to work hard because I'm Latina, because I'm Mexican, because I'm this. Like, it was always like, oh, I'm going to work hard because that's how I was raised. Like, you worked hard and you never used gender or race or anything as like an excuse or as the motivator. And then when I got into coaching, that's when it really became like a big thing for me because I was approached when I was at the NAI level, I was approached by a Mexican magazine that was like, hey, do you know that you're the only Mexican born female head coach, at the collegiate level? And it was me and the coach at Simpson University. It was me and him, but he was the first male. I was the first female, coincidentally, both of us on the women's basketball side. And I said,
Right.
I never thought of that. I was like, that was a fun fact that I never thought of. And then the more I kind of owned that fact, I was like, okay, now I see it as a responsibility to continue to open doors, right? And reach backwards and help others. And so yeah, I think it's something that I do year round. I have to do it year round, not just Hispanic Heritage Month, because it's one of those things where it's like who I am and what I represent is an everyday thing, right? It's kind of like Black History Month. Like, Black people don't just celebrate Black History Month on in February. It's like year round. And so same thing for us, Hispanic Heritage Month, and I'm sure for Pride and AAPI, like it's a year round thing for us because it's part of our identity. And so with Liz Reyes, who's now Liz Fuqua, we started Latinx in athletics. And as you know, I used to be part of LABC. And so with LABC, I'm no longer coaching. And so then when I got out of coaching, I was still part of Latino LABC. And then I wanted to bring in more athletic administrators. And it was like, oh, well, this is a Latino association. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start another one. And it's going to be Latinx in athletics. And it's going to be all collegiate, anything collegiate, right? Because there's another organization called Latinx in sports that does a lot of the pro sports space. And so I found the gap between coaches and the pro sports space and administrators. And so us Latinx administrators, we didn't really have a space to where we could go and have like a meeting of the minds. And so Liz and I started this LEA, and I realized like just creating that platform, I found out there were Latina lacrosse coaches, Latina field hockey coaches. I mean, we have Division I football coaches, like just a plethora of representation across all sports, which I wouldn't have known had I just stayed on LABC, right? Latino Basketball Association. If I would have just stayed on that side, I wouldn't have been able to really bring more exposure to the other Latino and Latina coaches across other spaces, and then also in administration. And so I say that to say that, like, for me, I've been able to enter spaces that one, I never thought I would fathom being in. But then now for me, I don't want to be just the first and then be like, oh, the only, right? I want to be the first, but then I want to reach back and then pull other people with me, or bring other people with me into that space, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, if Patty works hard and she's great at what she does, we can bring in more Patties, right? We can have other Latinas. And so just recently we hired our second Latina in administration here. She's our assistant athletic director of facilities. And she's from DR, born and raised in the Dominican Republic. And so I'm like, you got a born and raised Dominican Republic, you got a born and raised Mexican in the same offices at a PWI. You know, these are things that for me, it excites me because it's being able to bring different people in different backgrounds. And my friends always joke that if and when I become an athletic director, they're like, your administration is going to look like the United Nations because you're literally like, you're going to intentionally have, you know, because I want that. Like, I want a diverse, not just representation, but mindset, right? Like the lived experience that you have in comparison to mine, that in itself is priceless. And so for me, like, I would want to be surrounded by people that have different lived experiences, because then the way they approach things will be differently. And you know, we're now in a generalist field where it's like, you don't want specialists. You don't want someone in marketing that just had marketing background their whole life. Like, you want somebody that did marketing and then maybe went off and did sociology for a little bit and then is back to marketing, because then now they've broadened their ideas and, you know, their creativity. And so yeah, I don't ever enter any space and not really, you know, say it on a bullhorn that I'm Mexican. Everywhere I go, I'm like, you know, I really amplify being Latina, and I use it as my superpower as well. And I think to tie it in with NIL, it's our culture is our currency. And I think for me, culture being the currency is something that we can teach our student athletes, right? You have, I don't know if you've noticed, but like even on social media, you're seeing more student athletes really hone in on their parents' heritage and their parents' background. And now you're seeing more NFL, like when they had the draft, you know, you had like, oh, the first Dominicano or the first Spanish speaking NFL draftee or the first NBA draftee whose parents are from Dominican Republic, you know. And so you're seeing that because brands want that. And so the more you can amplify your brand and how it's represented in different areas, the more marketable you are, right? So your culture is your currency. If I just said, oh, I'm an athletic director at American University, there's only so much that goes into that brand. But now I say I'm first gen, single mom, born in Mexico, you know what I mean? Like, there's probably a list of things that I could list off, and companies would be like, oh, wow, we want a student athlete like that identifies. And, you know, now you throw in different terminology in there. And here we don't use intersectionality anymore. We call it pluralism. So now pluralism, you have this, like, who you are as a whole and all the identities that you represent. And so, yeah, I can say a lot about being Latina and how proud I am of it. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of is the opportunities that we have been able to create for other Latinas. So now I'm on the board for MOA, which is the Minority Opportunities Athletic Association. You know, we started LEA. I'm part of N4A Ethnic Concerns Committee. And so just being in these spaces where I can say, hey, I have someone from our Latina, you know, from our LEA Rolodex that can be a part of this. And so just trying to get everyone in those spaces.
Well, the lens that I wear is, you know, I'm not Hispanic or Latino, but my kids are. My wife is. And I think as long as, and this is maybe a call to action to all affinity groups, is to have space for people who may not be, but they're trying to open up and set a pathway for, you know, who they've created, kids and whatnot. But I think it's a huge advantage that, you know, kids can see who they are, even in a blended world, blended world as we have, but also the pride of you know, just parents, grandparents, and knowing those stories. A couple more questions that I want to toss out to you. You take over an athletic department. We're role playing right now. You're taking over an athletic department. What are the top two priorities, or what are the first two decisions that you make?
It probably sounds cliche, but I would go on my listening tour first 6 months, you know, go on a listening tour and really gauge the culture of the department and like what you're walking into. And a lot of times, depending on if it's through a search firm or if it's through, direct hire, sometimes you'll be able to tell like what the culture it is that you're walking into. But I really think, one of these conferences, I attend so many conferences, but in one of these conferences that I went to, Diana, who is now at Maryland as a deputy AD, but she was the AD at Utah, she was saying that when she takes on a job, she goes and does a start, stop, begin, right? And so she'll go around on the listening tour and she'll say start, stop, begin. She'll ask everyone like, what are stop, start? It was stop, start, and it was something else. Continue, stop, or begin. That's what it was. So
Yeah.
what do you want to continue that we're doing? What do you want to continue that we have been doing that you like, right? What do we need to stop doing? And then what can we begin doing? And so then she would go around the department and ask everybody, like, what are some things that you want to continue, you want to stop, and you want to begin? And so then people would be honest. She said people would be honest with her and they'd say, hey, like, this isn't functioning. We've tried to tell the previous AD, this is not, we should stop that, or we should start this. And she says the more you can kind of go around and do that, she's like, people will give you the keys to success in your job, right? So that would be the number one thing. And then the question for me, what I would do obviously is set the expectation. I think setting the expectation and really getting buy-in. And like I said, I think I have a foot in the door in the sense of I'm a former coach and I'm around coaching a lot and around the coaching world, especially women's basketball. But I think you really need to establish buy-in. I think a lot of times people go into jobs and they say, oh, well, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to win. But then if you start having conversations, some people are okay with not winning as long as they have retention, as long as they have a 4.0 GPA, team GPA, like they don't care if they win or lose, And so that for me would be another thing that I would do is like I would sit with my coaches and I would say, hey, what are you here to do? And then does it align with what I want them to be there to do, right? Because if I'm coming in, I want us to win as much as I want retention, like, but are you keeping people that aren't helping you win, right? For the sake of retention. For example, some institutions don't let coaches cut players. That's cool, but you can't have an expectation for me to win if you're not going to let me cut the cancer from my team that is just, I'm just not realizing is a cancer, 2-3 months into the season. And so I think those are the things that really align with me. But one thing I've learned from all the ADs that I've talked to, the number one thing that I would be before I even take on the job is really have a sit down with the president and really make sure that our ideas align, right? And that to the point we made earlier, am I coming in to help this program win? Am I coming in just to build revenue generation? Am I coming in to have to do both? Am I coming in to do cross-campus collaborations and work, with other constituents across campus? Like, what are the goals? Because then I can go back to my coaches and say, these are my expectations. This is how I'm going to help you. These are your expectations. This is how we're going to help this be, a successful department. So it's a very loaded question because it really depends like what you're walking into. It's kind of like coaching, right? Like if you're like, I can't be like, hey, Brian, okay, let's role play. You got a job. What are the first two things you do? Because it really depends. Like, are you walking into a successful program? Are you walking into a program that maybe only won one game last year? Because your two approaches are going to be way different depending on what you're walking into. And so I think administration is the same in that sense of, am I walking in and clearing house? Or am I walking in and just not messing up what the previous AD did, right? Because I might inherit an awesome program. I might inherit a program that is already, great and already has all the process and procedures in place. I just kind of go in and put in my own flair. Or it might be one that is like, hey, it's a sinking ship. Now I got to come in and fix it. And so I think it really depends on the situation.
Well, it really is one of those things that, there's so much,
Mm-hmm.
and there's that saying that, what is it? Culture eats strategy, right? But
Yeah.
the issue I have with that is what's the next line?
Mm-hmm.
People kill culture.
Yeah.
And so to get the right people in place and in the right chairs is in itself. But before this last question, Patty, I just want to acknowledge you. I love your track record. I love your trajectory. You've always represented coaches, even in the chair of administration, but also at the same time, you're opening up so many different avenues by just sitting in the chair that you do. And there's no doubt that the future is bright. Um,
Thank you.
One, because you have that standard, but there's so much responsibility that you've called upon yourself to have. So I acknowledge that. So last question we ask everybody: the future of college athletics is blank because blank.
Hmm. Well, while I think about that one, I also want to say thank you for that compliment because uh, I still remember vividly when I was doing my first basketball camp in Mexico and I called you up. You were at Chandler Gilbert, and I was like, hey, do you want to go to Mexico with me and run this camp? And at the time, you were in the process of taking a new job, so you ended up not coming. But I do appreciate you, and you just being apt to doing all of that. And then the compliment you just gave me, it means a lot because you've known me since my trenches, my days in the trenches. So I appreciate that a lot. But to answer your question, um, it's gonna sound cliche, but it is what it is at this point, right? The future of sports is female. And the reason being is that right now, not right now, but it's in process, is the cultural impact that women in sports is having with WNBA expansion, with the PWHL, with the National Women's Soccer, with Olympic sports being as popular as they are. And in the NIL space, women bring in a lot more NIL deals than men's sports. Even though it feels like the men do, there's I don't know what the actual data is, but women, I think it's like 60%, 70% of NIL deals are female athletes. So any school that is not capitalizing on their women's sports is going to fall behind because of this current state that we're in as far as the power of women's sports. And I think the more administrators can hone in on that, right? For us, it's volleyball, women's soccer, field hockey, lacrosse. Like the more we can hone in on that, we've been packing out the field hockey uh, stands. Like, and in the past, it hasn't been like that. And it's just that you have, to your point, girl dads. You have, people that have great relationship with their moms or their grandmas or their aunties. So it's like the female aspect. It tends to be a common denominator in any space because we all have a woman in our life that made an impact. And so I think it's turning a tide right now where women's sports are going to be the top revenue sports on campuses. And I think it's something that administrators need to capitalize on because it's literally just getting started. And so, kudos to the WNBA, the PWHL, like all of those women sports that are, because what they're doing at their level in their pro sports is trickling into college.
Yeah. And it's creating just so many opportunities now for young girls to play and be around, but also see great leadership. So,
Yeah.
Patty, thank you for being part of this. We are also on this uptick, and hopefully, this conversation is valuable to not only administrators but also coaches and fans and thought leaders. To all of you who have joined us, thank you. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow. New episode drops every Tuesday. So for myself and Patty, we thank you and see you on the trail.
Yep.